Aloha and welcome back. In this lesson, we're going to be talking about writing files. In the last lesson, we talked about reading files. Now let's talk about the other side of it, which is writing. So let me go ahead and share my screen. I'm going to pull up the handy dandy code, VS Code here, and we're going to talk about writing files. Well, you can write files in a similar fashion to the way you were reading them. You can use a function called, when we've opened up a file, and we have it in a file pointer, basically, like we did before. Let's start the coding process, and we're going to say file equals open, and then we're going to have the name of our file, and here it's going to be, oh, what was our path before? Oh, that's the path, and then we're going to put in names.text here, and now that we've got name.text, that's how we're going to open it. But if we're going to be writing it, we're going to have to add one little thing in here, and I'll get to that in just a second. One thing that I want to talk about when we're using our write construct is that write only takes strings. It doesn't take, it can only take strings. So if you're going to be putting in like a number or something like that, you need to convert it over to a string first. Okay, so just keep that in mind. So anyways, I was talking about we need to add one other thing here to our open command, and that is going to be a second argument. And that argument is what we call a mode. In our mode here, you can see that we just got listed a ton of modes here. The most common ones are going to be R for read, W for write, and A for append. Now, one of the things that we don't have to do if we're reading, we don't have to put an R there. If you omit your second argument here, it's going to think that you're reading it and it's just going to read. But if we're going to write like we are now, we need to put in a W here for writing. You can see there's all kinds of other combinations. Don't worry about that for now. All we're going to worry about is W. Okay, so W, R, and A. So R is read, W is write, A is append. Okay. And there's one other thing we can do. We can add like a plus to it, which allows us to update things as well. We're not going to worry about that for now. Just keep your mind on R, W, and A. And in this section, we're going to be focused predominantly on W and A. Okay. So when you go and you try to write to a file like this, it's going to look for that file name. And if it doesn't find that file name when you're writing, what's going to happen? Well, it will create that file. It'll create a file with this name, and it will start to write to it. If you're reading from a file and that file name doesn't exist, you're going to get an error. You're going to get an error because that file doesn't exist. There's nothing to read, and it's going to basically crap out on you. So don't put in something when you're reading that's not there. But for write, and this is actually kind of dangerous when you're writing. Sometimes you assume that a file is there and it's not. And when you go to write, you find out that you're creating a new file in a place that you don't know, and you go to look in your directory and you don't see it there. You're like, I could have sworn I wrote it out. Something must have gone wrong here. Now you have to do a search of your file system to see, hey, where did I actually put that file? So if you'll remember from a previous lesson, I had not specified the full path here. And because I didn't specify this full path, it would dump it into the user/John Johnson directory, and that's where I would find names. But luckily here, we're not going to have that problem because I've used the entire full path, so we won't have any issues with that. So so that's that. One other thing to be aware of is there's something called an output buffer. And an output buffer is essentially a place where, as you're ready to put, as you're writing characters out to the file, it's going to buffer them up. In other words, it's going to stack them up before it actually writes it all out there. And usually it writes it out when a new line character is received. So when it gets that /n, that new line character, that's the point at which it flushes it. And when I say flush, it means it takes everything in the buffer and it pushes it out to disk. So you can set buffering in the open statement up here. You can add in another argument that's going to be your buffer or your buffering size or something like that. So so going back to that, if you want to set a buffer, it's going to be 0 to disable the buffer. So That is something that's only valid with binary files, which we're going to be talking about later. Using a 1 as your buffer is going to enable line buffering, which is the default that you've got. It's going to, basically take line by line until it gets that new line character. And then any other number is going to be a specification of the number of bytes that you have. So if we wanted to do an example here, we could say we just set buffering equals 2, and we could say 100. And if we put in buffering equals 100 here, then it's going to wait till it gets 100 characters, and it's going to push all that out into the file. It's going to write it all out. It'll flush it out. So you can flush the buffer manually if you want to. If you want to do that, you're going to have to use the flush command. And the flush command looks something like, it's just, you do something like, oops, flush. Hold on, I think we're going to do, hold on, I apologize. My system is running slowly here. So we can do a flush on it. And this will force it to flush. Some operating systems, you're going to have to add in another statement there, and that's going to be os.fsync. And to get access to this function, you're actually going to need to go up above and import OS, because OS is not there by default. So you're going to have to import your OS in order to get that. So let's go back down here. So again, when you're going to do write statements, when you're opening it up, you're going to open it up like we did with the read. We're going to have to specify the W or the A for appending. So the difference between writing and appending is essentially writing is going to start that new file, or it's going to overwrite whatever file is already there. So it's going to wipe out whatever's there and it's going to overwrite it. If you use A, what it's going to do is it's going to stick it at the end of it. So that's what the append does. So you're either going to overwrite the file or you're going to stick it at the end. And we have this thing called buffering. And buffering is the amount of the number of bytes it's going to take until it pushes it out to the disk. So the default is 1, which means when it gets a new line, it's going to flush it out. 0 is it's going to disable buffering, and that's only valid when you're working with binary files. And any other number that you put in there for buffering is going to specify the number of bytes after which you flush it automatically. And if you want to manually flush, you can go over here and do a file.flush or a os.fsync. But this shows you how to write. And then after that, you're going to be using, that's how we set it up to write. And then after that, we can go in here and use the actual write command to write onto the file. Oops, hold on. So we can do a file.write. And I don't want to destroy my file, so let's actually go back up here and change this to append. And let's just put, instead of a name like it already has, we'll just put hello world here and see what, so we're going to do that and see what happens. So we're going to get, oops. So my operating system, we're not going to have to worry about this. Let's go ahead and take out the, let's just take out the flush altogether since we're not going to need that. Let's try running that again, and nothing happened. But if we look over here at names, boom, look, it put in hello world at the end. It put it in twice because we ran it before and it crashed, and then it ran it again and it put hello world in there. So if I erase this and save it, then we go back over to our code and we run this code again, we're going to see that, boom, it put hello world at the end of it. Of course, it's stuck there because we don't have a new line character after it. So if we really didn't want to, mess up the thing, we'd want to put a new line character over here in front of this. But that's how you write out to a file. And again, the thing that you really need to remember, like I did not show you, is to close your files when you're done. Because sometimes if you don't do that, you can come up with errors, because you'll have a file that's been written to, it's not properly closed, and you may get trouble accessing it in the future. So always try to close your files out like this. Okay, So that is it for writing files. We will get into more interesting things as the sections progress. So if you have any questions about this, reach out to me. Let me know what you're having trouble with. Give me a call if you want. You know, send me an email. Say, hey, I need help. Can you set up a Zoom session with me to go over this? And I'd be happy to reach out and do a one-on-one with you in Zoom. So take care, and I'll see you in the next lesson.